You feel guilty when you spend money. Even when you can afford it. Even when it makes sense. Even when you worked hard for it. You buy something small, a coffee, a lunch, a shirt, and immediately that voice appears. Should I have done that? You open your banking app. The number is fine. But the feeling doesn't go away. And there's one thing nobody tells you about that guilt. It has nothing to do with money. You're at the checkout. Or with your finger over the confirm purchase button. And you freeze. Not because the money isn't there. Not because it's a hard decision. You freeze because your brain fires something before you even think. Do I really need this? I can wait. This might be a waste. And you stand there for a second, negotiating with yourself over something that costs less than an hour of your work. Sometimes you buy it anyway. And feel that quiet guilt right after. Sometimes you don't buy it. And spend the rest of the day thinking about it. Either way, you didn't rest. Either way, the money cost more than the price. Now multiply that by the entire day. The morning coffee you hesitated over before ordering. The lunch you swapped for something cheaper without really wanting to. The shirt you looked at for weeks, added to your cart, removed from your cart, added again, and finally didn't buy because spending didn't feel right. The gift you gave someone and mentally calculated whether it was too expensive or too cheap. The restaurant bill you looked at 3 times before paying. These aren't financial decisions. They're emotional negotiations. And they happen dozens of times a day. Each one small. Each one quick. But added together, they weigh on you. There's a fatigue that comes from spending mental energy on every cent that leaves your account. It's not the tiredness of working. It's the tiredness of never feeling safe enough to simply buy something and move on. And the strangest part of all this? It doesn't matter how much you have in the account. The hesitation is always there. The number is never enough to silence that voice. As if the balance needs to be higher. Always a little higher. As if there's a magic number somewhere ahead, and when you get there, then you'll be able to relax. But that number never comes. Because it's not about the number. Now stop for a second. Think of someone you know who spends money without all that hesitation. Not someone irresponsible. Not someone rich. Just someone who buys something and moves on. No calculating 3 times. No justifying to themselves. No voice. How does that person make you feel? Probably a strange mix. A little admiration. A little judgment. A little envy you don't want to admit. Because deep down you don't understand how someone can do that. Spending without guilt feels like irresponsibility. It feels like carelessness. It feels like something people who don't worry about the future do. And you worry. You always have. But now stop and ask a different question. All that worrying, did it help you? Not in the sense of having more money in the account. Maybe yes, maybe no. But in the sense of living better. Of feeling safer. Of actually resting. Because if the answer is no, if you still feel the same anxiety with $1,000 in the account as you did with 100, if the number grew but the feeling didn't change, then the problem was never how much you had. The problem is what money means to you. And that is completely different from a financial problem. It's a pattern. A pattern that was learned. And like every learned pattern, it has an origin. There's a concept psychologists call scarcity mindset. The idea is simple. When a person goes through a period of lack of money, lack of security, lack of stability, the brain learns a rule. Resources are limited. Protect what you have. And that rule makes complete sense when the scarcity is real. If you grew up in a house where money caused arguments, your brain learned to treat money as a threat. If you've ever run out of money at the end of the month not knowing how you'd pay a bill, your brain registered that. If you watched someone you loved despair over money, your brain filed that image away. The problem isn't that the brain learned wrong. The problem is that it doesn't unlearn on its own. Even when the situation changes, when you have a job, when the account is positive, when the bills are paid, the brain keeps operating by the old rule. Still in protection mode. Still treating every expense as a threat. And that's where the guilt comes from. Not because you're spending wrong, but because your brain still believes you're in danger. Now there's a second layer to this that makes everything harder. Psychologists call it loss aversion. Studies show that losing something hurts approximately twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. Think about that for a second. Gaining $100 creates one feeling. Losing $100 creates twice that feeling, but in reverse. For someone who already has a scarcity mindset, this effect is amplified. Watching the account number drop, even for something you need, even for something you deserve, hurts. Not metaphorically. Neurologically. The brain registers that drop as loss, as threat, as danger, and responds with anxiety. And you call that financial responsibility. But it isn't. It's your survival system firing in a moment that isn't about survival. And there's a third layer. Over time, caution becomes identity. You start to see yourself as the careful one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't waste. And then spending, any spending, starts to threaten not just the money. It starts to threaten who you think you are. Buying something for pleasure feels like weakness. Spending without justification feels like irresponsibility. Relaxing feels like carelessness. So you keep restricting yourself. Not because you need to, but because stopping feels dangerous. And the number in the account keeps growing. But the feeling of security never arrives. Because security was never about the number. It was about what happened before the number. And no bank balance erases a memory. You didn't learn to be careful with money. You learned to be afraid of it. And fixing that doesn't start in your bank account. It starts with understanding where that fear came from.